March 1945. The Pacific Ocean stretches endlessly in every direction, cold, blue, quiet. For the men aboard the USS Bunker Hill, the USS Indianapolis, the battleships and cruisers and destroyers of the Fifth Fleet, this is the last moment of peace they will ever know. They don't know it yet, but in 72 hours, they will sail into the most brutal, bloody and terrifying invasion in the history of the Pacific War. It will be called Operation Iceberg, the Battle of Okinawa. And for 82 days, the sea, the sky, and the island itself will become one vast graveyard. This is the story of hell over water, where death came from above, where the ocean turned red, and where young men, American and Japanese, fought not just for victory, but for survival. To understand what happened at Okinawa, you have to understand why it mattered. By early 1945, the war in the Pacific had turned. Island by island, the United States was closing in on Japan. Saipan, Guam, Iwo Jima. Each one brought American bombers closer to the Japanese homeland. But there was one island left. One final stepping stone, Okinawa, just 340 miles south of mainland Japan, close enough to launch the final invasion, close enough to end the war. But the Japanese knew this too, and they were ready to defend it with everything they had. The plan was massive, over 180,000 American troops, 1,500 ships, the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific theater. Admiral Chester Nimitz called it the iceberg, cold, hard, unforgiving. And just like an iceberg, most of the danger was hidden beneath the surface. The Americans expected resistance, they expected casualties, but nothing could prepare them for what was coming, because this time the Japanese had a new weapon, a weapon of flesh and steel, a weapon that didn't retreat, didn't surrender, the kamikaze. In Japanese, it means divine wind. The term comes from the 13th century, when a typhoon destroyed an invading Mongol fleet, saving Japan from conquest. The storm was seen as a gift from the gods, a divine wind. Now, in 1945, Japan would become that wind. By this point in the war, Japan was losing. Its navy was crippled, its air force decimated. Conventional tactics had failed. So the Japanese military made a decision born of desperation and honor and a cultural willingness to die for the emperor. They would turn their pilots into living missiles. Young men, some barely out of school, would be given a plane, a full fuel tank, and a bomb. Their mission: fly into the heart of the American fleet and detonate. No parachute, no return, no hope. These pilots wrote goodbye letters to their families. They drank ceremonial sake. Some tied headbands inscribed with the rising sun around their foreheads. They were told they were heroes, that their deaths would save Japan, and then they took off. By the time of Okinawa, thousands of kamikaze pilots had already launched. But this battle would see the largest, most concentrated kamikaze offensive in history. The Americans called them suicide planes, but to the sailors who faced them, they were something far worse. They were death incarnate, and they were coming. April 1st, 1945, Easter Sunday. The Americans called it Love Day. At 8:30 in the morning, the first waves hit the beaches. Hagushi, Kadena, Yontan, 60,000 men in the first 24 hours. The troops braced for hell. They remembered Tarawa, Iwo Jima, Saipan. Beaches turned into killing fields, but this time, nothing. No resistance, no artillery, no machine gun nests. The beaches were empty. The men moved inland, cautious, confused. Where were the Japanese? They didn't know it yet, but the Japanese had changed tactics. They weren't going to fight on the beaches. They were going to let the Americans land let them march inland, and then they would bleed them dry. But that was the land war. At sea, the real nightmare was just beginning. April 6, 1945, 5 days after the landing, the Fifth Fleet sat off the coast of Okinawa, over 1,300 ships, carriers, battleships, destroyers, transports, the largest naval armada ever assembled. And then, at 3 p.m., the radar screens lit up, hundreds of contacts, incoming from the north, fast. The first kamikaze wave had arrived. They came in low, skimming the water, dozens of them, Mitsubishi Zeros, Nakajima bombers, whatever Japan had left. The sky erupted, 5-inch guns, 40mm Bofors, 20mm Oerlikons, tracers streaked across the sky like deadly fireworks. Some kamikazes exploded in mid-air, others spun into the sea, but some got through. The destroyer USS Bush took a direct hit. The plane punched through her deck and exploded in her engine room. She was dead in the water. Minutes later, another kamikaze struck, then another. The Bush broke apart and sank. 94 men went down with her, and that was just the beginning. Over the next 12 hours, the kamikazes sank 6 ships, damaged dozens more. Over 400 American sailors were killed, hundreds more wounded. And this was only the first wave. Imagine this. You're 19 years old. You're standing on the deck of a destroyer. The sun is setting. The ocean is calm. And somewhere out there, a man is flying toward you. A man who has already decided to die. You can't see him yet, but you know he's coming. This is what it was like at Okinawa. Every day, every hour, the waiting. Sailors didn't sleep. They couldn't. The alarms went off dozens of times a day. General quarters. General quarters. All hands man your battle stations. You'd run to your post, grab your helmet, load the guns, and scan the horizon. Sometimes nothing happened. False alarm. You'd stand down, go back to your bunk, try to eat, try to write a letter home. But you couldn't finish it, because the alarm would go off again, and again, and again. The stress was unbearable. Men cracked. Some froze at their posts. Others broke down sobbing. One sailor wrote home, "We don't know if we'll make it through the next hour. The kamikazes don't stop, they just keep coming." And he was right. They kept coming. The Japanese called them kikusui missions, floating chrysanthemums. Between April and June 1945, Japan launched 10 massive kamikaze offensives. Each one involved hundreds of planes. Each one targeted the American fleet off Okinawa. April 12th, the second kikusui wave, over 350 aircraft. The USS Manert El Abele, a destroyer, was on radar picket duty. Her job, early warning. She was alone, exposed. At 1:45 p.m., a kamikaze dove from the clouds. It struck the ship amidships. The explosion blew men overboard, but the Abele was still afloat, barely, and then something new appeared. A rocket-powered bomb, guided, unstoppable. The Japanese called it the Oka. The Americans called it the Baka, idiot bomb. The Oka hit the Abele below the waterline. The ship broke in half. She sank in less than 5 minutes. 79 men died. The Oka was a nightmare, a manned missile, piloted by a man strapped inside. No way out, no ejection seat, just a tiny cockpit and a ton of explosives. The pilot would be released from a bomber at high altitude. Then he'd glide down, lock onto a target, fire the rockets, and impact at over 600 miles per hour. There was no defense, no time to react. By the end of Okinawa, kamikazes and Okas had sunk 36 American ships, damaged hundreds more. But the cost to Japan was even higher. Over 4,000 kamikaze pilots died. Most of them never even reached their targets. They were shot down, blown apart, or they missed, crashed into the sea, alone. Both sides were bleeding, and the battle had only just begun. Let me tell you about some of the men who were there. Seaman First Class James Fahey. He served aboard the cruiser USS Montpellier. In his diary he wrote, "April 16th, another kamikaze attack today. The sky was full of them. We shot down 4, but 1 got through, hit the destroyer next to us. I watched men jump into the burning water. I don't know how many made it. Electrician's mate Eugene Brick, USS Laffey, April 16, 1945. His ship was hit by 6 kamikazes and 4 bombs in just 80 minutes. The Laffey should have sunk, but she didn't. Brick later said, "We were on fire from bow to stern. Half the crew was dead or wounded, but we kept fighting. We had no choice. The Laffey survived, barely. She was towed back to port. 32 men were killed, 71 wounded, but she stayed afloat. They called her the ship that would not die." And then there was the USS Aaron Ward, May 3, 1945. She was attacked by over 20 kamikazes in a single hour. 5 of them hit. The ship lost power, lost steering. Fires raged on every deck. 42 men were killed, but the survivors kept fighting. They put out the fires by hand. They threw debris overboard. They kept the ship afloat. When the smoke cleared, the Aaron Ward was still there, burned, broken, but alive. These weren't just battles. They were acts of will, men refusing to give up, refusing to die. Because if they went down, their shipmates went with them. While the fleet fought for its life at sea, on land, the soldiers were drowning in their own hell. The Japanese had fortified the southern end of Okinawa, hills, ridges, caves. They called it the Shuri Line, and it was a fortress. The Americans advanced yard by yard, through mud, through rain, through fire. Hacksaw Ridge, Sugarloaf Hill, Wanna Ridge, each one a killing ground. Private First Class Desmond Doss, a medic, saved 75 men at Hacksaw Ridge. He refused to carry a weapon. He was a conscientious objector. But he ran into enemy fire again and again, pulling wounded soldiers to safety. He later received the Medal of Honor, but for every hero, there were 1,000 ghosts. Men buried in the mud, men who never came home. By the end of May, the Americans had taken the Shuri Line, but the cost was staggering. And the Japanese? They retreated south to make their final stand, June 21, 1945. After 82 days, the Battle of Okinawa was over. The Americans had won. But the price? Over 12,000 American soldiers, sailors, and Marines were killed, 38,000 wounded. The Japanese lost over 100,000 soldiers and at least 100,000 Okinawan civilians, men, women, children, caught in the crossfire, starved, bombed. Some threw themselves off cliffs rather than surrender. It was hell. On land, at sea, in the air. But the battle did something else. It showed the American leadership what invading mainland Japan would cost. Estimates ranged from 500,000 to over 1 million American casualties. And so, 2 months later, the decision was made. August 6th, Hiroshima. August 9th, Nagasaki. The war ended, but the men who fought at Okinawa, they carried it with them forever. Today, off the coast of Okinawa, the sea is calm, blue, peaceful. But beneath the surface lie the wrecks of dozens of ships, American, Japanese, tombs of steel and bone. And on the island itself, memorials stand, names carved in stone, thousands of them, American, Japanese, Okinawan. The Battle of Okinawa was the last great battle of World War II, and it was the bloodiest. It showed the world what total war truly meant, not just soldiers fighting soldiers, but entire populations consumed by violence. The men who survived never forgot, the sailors who dodged kamikazes, the Marines who crawled through the mud, the pilots who flew into the flames. They came home, but a part of them stayed there, forever. This was hell over water, the battle for Okinawa, where the sea turned red, where the sky rained fire, and where young men on both sides paid the price for a war that should never have been.